Who owns the float in a construction schedule? That is the topic that we're going to cover today, and I think you're going to learn some new things that you haven't heard before, so stay with us. By the end of this video, I really want you to get to a point where you never look at float in a construction schedule the same way again. You have a completely new perspective, and I hope that perspective really allows you to be safe. And what I mean by that is that you never get in a situation where your project is at risk, or you get into a situation where you're feeling like you're not successful in your role. So here are some things that I'm about to talk to you about. I'm going to explain the definitions in a way that you've never heard before. The other thing is I'm going to explain and answer the question, should we or should we not have float? And if so, where should it be? And I'll also tell you where most of the pitfalls come from in construction scheduling as it relates to float. So I'm going to give you at least 3 or 4 key things that you can watch out for and be like, okay, I don't want that to happen to me. That's what we're covering today in this video. And why does that apply to you? What's in it for you? Because you'll want to know this if you want to run remarkable construction projects and if you want to succeed in your role. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this right now. Let's talk about what is float. When we visualize a schedule, I usually like to visualize it in 2 different ways. When we're talking about master schedules, we typically, if we have a CPM schedule, we'll have a start date, and I like to visualize the end date down here. And typically we have sequences of activities that are logic tied together, and that logic then will tell us what our critical path is, right? So each of these sequences would be what's called a work breakdown structure so that you can piece that huge project into smaller structures, okay? So float would be if in any of these activities, which would be called free float, or in the overall project, total project float or project float, if you have any slack or time where those activities can drift but not affect the end date of the schedule. That's actually a perfect explanation, okay? So float, it allows you to absorb variation and to allow some of these activities or the entire string of activities to delay before it actually delays the end date. Now, this is what we're going to cover next. There's something in construction called a critical path. And these critical paths, what it will say is, and let me get my red marker over here. What it will say is, hey, it does a forward and a backward pass. I'm not going to explain the algorithm in this video, but it goes through a mathematical algorithm, and it basically calculates up into the end date and back and shows how much float each of these activities has as free float, or how much float these activities might have as a sequence for total project float or project float. And so what it will do is it will tell you what is the critical path. So I'm going to draw red, right, through this as an example of, hey, maybe this was your critical path. So this sequence right here, this sequence right here, and these 2 right here were on the critical path. Now, here's what I want you to watch out for that's really crucial for your project. Some definitions, and I do believe most of how people understand the definition of a critical path, it's explained this way. It is the longest path of activities where if any of these activities were delayed, it would delay the entire project. So a lot of owners and a lot of scheduling consultants and a lot of people in the construction industry will say, hey, I don't want to see any float. Remember what we were talking about here at the end, in your critical path. And that's a mistake, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So if anybody is using that term critical path in that way, watch out, because there should never be any schedule in construction that doesn't have float. And I'll explain that in a minute. The other way that I like to visualize this is in a Takt format. So remember, this is the critical path method, or CPM. Let's look at this in Takt, okay? So for Takt, you will have sequences, and those sequences will be repeated by zone, and that will represent a phase. And there may be other phases, and those phases from the start, again, to the end will link together, but a lot of times these phases in a takted system will have buffers, which is the same thing as float, at the end, and we'll have the intentional placement of buffers at the end. I'm going to say something that I think is that you'll find really interesting. In a takted system, We do not run off of a critical path. We run off of what's called a critical flow path. So you could say CFP, a critical flow path, which basically means that there's a path in construction that runs through this phase, but it also runs through the buffers, runs through that second phase through the buffers and over to the end. So the reason it's called a critical flow path is because you have to have buffers in order for it to flow. Here's my point. In a takted system or in a CPM system, you must have buffers. That critical path must have this float at the end. Your takt plan must have those buffers at the end. If not, here's what's going to happen. And this is really, really bad. What's going to happen is you're going to sustain a delay, and then that delay, because it doesn't have buffers, because it's right up to the end date, is going to push you behind schedule, behind schedule, behind schedule, and then somebody's going to complain and you're going to start stacking activities. And when you start stacking activities, that is the worst thing that can happen. That brings all of the other productivity impacts that we've talked about in other videos. It's going to slow down your workforce. It's going to make team sizes too large. It's going to bring in context switching. It's going to change your leaders. It's going to have leaders focusing on too many projects. It's going to make sure that you don't have time to install it right the first time. You'll start working overtime. You will stop looking at roadblocks, and your whole system will break down, and you'll go into a state of decay or into a state of chaos. So float must be a part of your schedule. If I was walking into the schedule store, I'm like, I'm in here. Me and my wife, we would like to buy a schedule today. We would never open the door and be like, I want the schedule that doesn't have float, that is so tight that I'll barely make it, that assumes that we'll never have any schedule delays, where if we do have a schedule delay, the owner will be mad, we'll be in trouble, we'll start crash landing the project, working overtime, and my life will be miserable. Do you have one of those? I'd like to buy one of those today. Nobody would do that. Ever. Like nobody. It's just not a thing. People would walk into the store and be like, I want a schedule that takes care of my family, the workers, and is realistic. If you want to buy one of those schedules, you'll buy one or you'll make one with float. And so that is the importance of having float on a construction project. Okay, so at this point, we're halfway through the video. I've got 4 or 5 more key points that you'll want to stick around to find out about. But before I do that, I do want to say, if you have questions about this, if you want to learn more, not only do we have other videos explaining CPM, float, takt, and buffers that we can send you like at a moment's notice, but also if you have questions, put those in the comments, right? Like, subscribe, and put those in the comments, and we'll get that information back to you. The reason you'll want to subscribe is that if we post that answer to your comment, you'll get that and you'll be notified. So really cool stuff. And let's keep going on this video. So I want to answer a couple of questions here. Who owns the float? And here's what I want to caution you about. If you're in a contract where it says the owner owns the float or that it's shared float, you'll want to watch out for that. Float or buffers should be primarily used for delays and interruptions and variation. Meaning, if there was a problem that happened in the sequence, if there was a worker shortage, if there was, I'm not talking about a safety accident, but some kind of accident, let's say the crane was being shipped to the project site and one of the sections hit a bridge. That actually happened to me. And now you're delayed for a couple of days. You're going to want to use that float and those buffers for things like that. It's not a free-for-all for, hey, I didn't finish design, so now I'm going to eat up all your flow. So be careful of that. And if you really want to talk to your owner and say, hey, this project needs a certain amount of float or a certain amount of buffers in order to absorb that variation. Now, I'll cover this quickly. You'll want to do a risk analysis. That means whatever format you have, and I will say that I always prefer a takt format, and I'll show you why in some of the videos that we'll link you to. If you have this format here, you'll want to do a risk analysis, which means that with your team, you say, here's our phase, write down all the things that could go wrong, and you say, okay, if that went wrong, how many days would that put us behind schedule? Okay? And then you go through and you do an analysis, and I'm not talking about acts of God here. I'm not talking like, okay, the United States got, attacked, God forbid, by nuclear missiles. Now I can't finish my project. We're not talking about that. We're talking about normal construction delays, not having enough manpower, materials not showing up, something showing up wrong, normal delays, right? What are the risks and how many days would that represent? So you go through that list and you take your largest number, okay? And that is the number of days that you'll want to attempt to target to have as float or as a part of your buffers. So it's based off of a risk analysis. And so the reason it's so important to know who owns it is because you're wanting this float or these buffers to absorb these risks, not just like willy-nilly excuses of my design's not done or I want to change something. Float is not in schedule, so owners can randomly design to change things. That's just not how it is. Second thing I want to warn everybody about is that if you're in a contract where you can't get a time extension or you can't get financial compensation for a change based on the critical path, you're in trouble. Here's what happens. The owner will say, oh, I delayed you over here. Okay, is that on the critical path? No, I don't owe you any time or money. Well, this could end up impacting the overall schedule. This could have a chain reaction. This could be a problem. So that's not a real argument. Whether or not it's in contracts or not, that's a moot point. Don't let it be. There is no such thing as in construction from a logical standpoint as only allowing for a time extension or financial compensation if it's on the critical path, because this critical path will change. It's a projection and it will change 3 or 4, sometimes even 50 different times. So you can't let yourself get into a contract like that. And so my point here is this. You're not from this video going to be an expert at CPM. You from this video are not going to become an expert at Takt. We will link you to cool videos, but you're not an expert. What I want you to do is have an awakening to the fact that if you have a single critical path without float, we're in trouble. If you have a contract that says you'll only get a time extension or financial compensation if it's on the critical path, we're in trouble. If you don't have your float properly placed and owned by the right people, you're in trouble. And so the float or the buffers in a construction schedule are there to absorb the risks. And we must get back to having schedules with float and with buffers. I use the word float with CPM and buffers with Takt, by the way. So you should never have a schedule ever without float or without buffers. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I think this is fun. And the reason I'm using male and female is because I'm likening this to my wife and me. So I think it's kind of fun, so let's just have some fun with it. If my wife and I were constantly going on vacation and we packed our catcher's mitts, our baseballs, and our bats, and we packed it up. And then one night I wake up on vacation and she's like swinging that bat at me and like beating me up with it at night. I'd be like, wait, what's going on? Like, get through that situation. And then the second vacation, she's packing up the bat, the ball, and the catcher's mitt. I'd be like, well, hold on a minute. Are you sure? And then if I wake up again on vacation and she's like just beating me with that thing, I'd be like, what in the world is going on? And I usually ask crowds of people, and I'll ask you, what do you think's not coming with me on vacation the third time? And some people joke around, they're like, your wife? Like, that's a whole other story. Probably. But the bat is not coming with me. Like, it's not coming with me on vacation. So even though a baseball bat can be used to have fun, right? Even though it's a pretty safe and benign thing, if somebody constantly beats you over the head with it, you shouldn't bring it with you. And so critical paths without float, yes, you can like theoretically build a project this way. Theoretically, a critical path isn't a big deal. But when owners keep beating you over the head with it, it becomes a problem. And I'm telling you, the owners in the construction industry constantly beat us over the head with this. And so we have to be careful. So it's a funny little story, just like likening it to me and my wife. It obviously would never happen. But the point is, someone's not coming with us on the next vacation. Either she or me or the bat, like one of us, because we are not going to get into that situation again. So don't let it happen to you in construction. And so I'm going to link these videos, some really cool videos where you can learn more about this information down in the description below. So don't let this end here. Go check those out and get more information and really put this to use.